Catchment Convos with Thriving Southland, your link to Southland catchment groups and their impactful projects. Each episode will dive into grassroots effort by local farmers and communities that are driving change and sustainability in our regions. Listen in for inspiring stories and insight. Real people, real change, the Southland way. Welcome to Catchment Convos. I'm your host, Rachel Halder, Senior Catchment Coordinator for Thriving Southland. And joining me on today's episode is Thriving Southland's project lead, Richard Kyte, and senior economist, Bill Kaye-Blake from the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research. Bill is a seasoned economist with over 25 years' experience. Bill has a knack for cutting through complexity and getting to the heart of challenges and opportunities in farming regulation. He spent his career working closely with rural communities, helping them navigate economic shifts and policy changes with practical, down-to-earth strategy. Bill's insights are grounded in real-world experience, making him the perfect guide for today's discussion on how regulation impacts the farming sector and what the future might hold. Okay, Bill, Richard, let's get into it. Richard, can you talk us through a little bit about how did this initial idea and, how was this project scoped initially?
Thanks, Rachel. So I suppose it all started out with we were hearing a lot from the farmers and from catchment groups about the problems with regulation and multiple regulation. And I think everybody's quite aware of that within the farming community about that. But we decided we'd actually look at how that was actually affecting farmers and their ability to operate in that space. So we did an initial piece of work with a few catchment group farmers and brought them in to talk about the challenges and all the challenges they're facing. And out of that, we basically got an understanding of what their challenges were, but then there was nothing that said, well, what could a possible pathway forward be? And that's where this work has come from.
And so, Bill, you were a part of that first piece of information and research as well. Can you share with us some of your thoughts from that first initial piece of work?
Yeah, sure. So that first piece of work was a really interesting set of discussions with different farmers. And I was looking back, it was actually about 3 years ago that we finished that up. So, this is a piece of work that's been a long time putting together. What we heard was farmers said they're under a lot of pressure. And that's kind of typical of farming. There's always something going on. So there's weather, there's market prices, there's problems on the farm, but then regulation's just that added pressure on them. It's another layer of stuff that they've got to deal with. But it's not just the fact that there is regulation. They said that it was really kind of two things going on. One was the uncertainty associated with the regulations that were coming along. So they couldn't say, this is what's going on and I need to deal with it. Instead, it was, I don't know what's happening. I've heard that something's going to happen, or government signaled that something's going to happen, but we don't have the rules now. So that was leading to kind of delay in decisions on farm. I don't want to make a decision now. I don't want to invest in a new something because I don't know what's going to happen. And then the second thing was just the number of regulations coming along. So it was these kind of different ministries all trying to do something, and they were just layering on top. So they didn't see kind of coordination coming out of central government and local government. Instead, it was just boom, 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 and they were going to have to deal with it at the farm level. So those were sort of the two bits of challenges that they were facing.
Yes, and still very topical at the moment. And I guess that's a big thing about what Thriving Southland does is, we try and listen to those ground up messages and, fill gaps. So as Richard, is that, sort of what happened here that, out of this piece of work, we were listening to what the farmers on the ground were saying and, is this how the project then got scoped into what it was for this report?
Yes, I suppose we looked at the first piece of work and the impact it was having. And then it's quite interesting. We sort of went out to farmer groups and we said, would you be, some of the catchment groups and said, would you be interested in actually talking about solutions, looking at the way forward or what good looks like? And at the time I thought, people have had enough of regulation and they won't be interested. But actually there was quite a strong uptake and people were actually wanting, individuals wanting to have their say and, their thoughts on what and how, regulation and if regulation should be brought in, what it should look like.
And what were the next steps from there, or how did you build this data set and information and get Bill involved again?
Yeah, so that was, there was obviously the voice was, we'd like to have a voice, and so we went back to Bill and we said, hey, Bill, can could you come in here again? Whole new group of farmers and quite a diverse range of farmers, age, stage, etc., and actually work through, where. What good would look like for them, and that's where Bill came back into the project.
Oh, okay. Also, Bill, so you got this set of instructions that was, we want to investigate further and we want to look into it a little bit more. What was the next steps and what was the building process to try and extract some of this knowledge and information out of those farmers?
Yeah, so we got a really clear steer that there were kind of two things going on. What does good look like? What would good look like from a farmer perspective? And then also, how can Thriving Southland help with that? So we work with Thriving Southland to set up 3 different workshops in 3 catchments. So we had a diversity of people involved in different places, different land use, farming type, size, age, etc. And we ran through this workshop, and there were 3 parts to the workshops that we held. And so in the first part, we just had people talk about good regulation and bad regulation, essentially. So what is an example of regulation that works really well and does a good job, does something useful? And what are some bad examples of regulation? And what was really great about that is obviously people can talk about bad regulation. Everybody can point to, oh, that guy's really messed up. But there were really good stories about stuff that works. So just as an example, regulations for chemical storage on farm, that was one of the things that people pointed to as a regulation that has a useful purpose, is well done. Farmers know what to do, and so they have sheds that have signage and all the rest of that. So that's an example of regulation that has a good purpose and does well, and farmers know what to do about it. Then in the workshops, we went from that to talking about, okay, as regulation is developed, how would you know that your voice is being heard? One of the topics of discussion in the previous workshops was about consultation. Farmers feel like they've been part of consultation, but it hasn't actually affected regulation. So they can't see that they are affecting the rules that come out. So we talked about, well, how would you know that you're being heard? How would you know that your voice is being heard? And then the final part of the workshops was about practical actions. So what can farmers do, regulators do, and Thriving Southland do to help have this voice or show that this voice is being heard, that the consultation is actually having an impact, and that regulations are, I guess, appropriate in the way that farmers can see that some regulations work. So how do we get there with new regulations? Those were the 3 parts of the workshops.
And, as the conversations went on, was everybody quite quick to join in? Did it take a little bit of, getting everybody on the same page? In each workshop, was everybody, on the same, I guess the same page with the same opinion, or was there like a huge variation within the room?
That's a great question. So first of all, everybody participated. We were really pleased that we got really good participation. Sometimes you set up these workshops and there's a guy in the corner who doesn't say anything, but not that. People were really happy to share their experiences and their opinions. So that was really great. But there's actually reasonable diversity of opinion in the farming community, certainly among the people that we talked with. I'll give an example. This came from the first set of workshops, but it was an interesting one about firearms regulations. So we had one person talking about the difficulties of getting the right firearms for pest control, and they felt that the regulations were a bit too overbearing. And then somebody else said, oh, well, but all you have to do is go down and do this and fill out that and talk to that person, and then the problem's solved. So there was a real sort of that particular one. There was a diversity of opinion about what was necessary and how kind of hard the hoops were to jump through, and we found that with some of the other regulations as well. So there was diversity of opinion, but people were quite open in sharing them.
And so, Richard, you attended one of the workshops, didn't you? As a bit of a bystander.
I did.
Did you want to add anything to Bill's sort of comments just around, how did the workshops go and how'd they feel?
I was really impressed that people actually with a positive hat on, and in a sense they were dealing with what was seen as a negative topic for them, but with a positive, let's have we realise some regulation needs to be there, others we're not sure about whether it should be there at all. But I suppose the whole there's a really good buy-in from the group, and yes, as I say, the diversity of farmers and agents staged there also led to that. But yeah, everybody wasn't on the same page, but everybody was looking, for solutions. So.
I was lucky enough to be a part of another one of the workshops as well. And I think if Bill and his co-worker hadn't been there to facilitate, we could have stayed up all night, trying to go into some of the detail. But it's a conversation that is big and it is really broad. So, Bill, you obviously out of those workshops ended up with a whole heap of information and differing opinions. What was your sort of next step there?
So what I want to do, I'll actually start with an example. We spent a lot of time talking about winter grazing regulations, because that was something, it's complex, it's big, people have a lot of experience with it, and it's fairly recent. So that was a really great practical example to use in our discussions. And what was interesting about it was the initial regulations came out, or draft regulations, whatever they were, and it was clear they wouldn't work. And then farmers came out and they said, well, this isn't going to work in Southland, so we need to do something about it. And kind of three things happened. One, farmers got engaged. They saw that there was an issue and they started getting involved in trying to figure out how to deal with this. The second thing that happened is the industry groups also got involved. So the farmers in Southland weren't having to deal with this on their own. The industry groups, so Beef and Lamb and Dairy and Zed, got involved as well to say, okay, well, what do we do about this? And then the third thing was the regulators from central government listened. They came to Southland, they attended some meetings, they listened to what was going on, and they made modifications to the regulations. So we saw all of these people coming together to figure out how to make things better and to change the regulations so they worked for Southland. And everybody was happy to kind of talk about that. And yeah, I mean, there was a bit of sort of, that didn't work very well. We want to grumble about it. But also there was a lot of kind of explaining, well, how did we react and what changes did that make to the regulations? And I guess what we saw with that is there were some practical things that people could do. So coming out of that was an example of the regulations didn't work, but we changed them. And so that then led to some discussions about what are some practical things that people can actually do. So, for example, sign up for your local newsletters or your Facebook pages or whatever kind of social media is going on. Signing up for those so you get the alerts. That was something that was useful in that case. People were alerted. There's a problem. We're going to have a meeting. Come on down. Paying attention to the farming press. So reading the articles that come along in your weekly newsletters or in your magazines or whatever, reading those and paying attention is another thing that farmers can do. And we kind of built on that to talk about, well, what are those practical things that people could do and who can do them?
Yeah, no, those are great examples and very topical for Southland. And, we do have a lot of regulation in today's, rural sector, and farmers are trying hard to navigate that space. And I think we've got a long way to go. So this is probably just the start, I imagine. But Richard, did you sort of want to add any comments here at this stage?
Oh, yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of useful information that came from the farmers. And I think one of the key points that I took away was that, need for clarity around regulation. And, there was regulation out there and nobody had actually put it clearly what it meant. And so it's very hard to actually adopt it or say this isn't fit if you kind of don't know where everything sits. But, and the other key point was really saying, actually, the model's a bit the wrong way around, because the regulators build the regulation and put it out there, and then we tell them it's all wrong. And our voice needs to be right in at the start, so instead of coming to Southland after the regulation doesn't fit, it's actually coming to Southland, talking with farmers and those, the levy groups and federated farmers, the people dealing in that space, and say, one, why do we need this regulation? Okay, so if we need this regulation, what should it look like and how do we make it practical? So it's actually, getting engaged in the conversation, but also for the regulators to actually think, we actually need to talk with the people who this is designed to work with and is going to affect, and then, and build the regulation from that with, the farmers and the levy groups, etc., in at the start.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? That whole working with the user and, looking for the intended outcome. So I guess that's a good sort of thought to have next is, it's great that we've talked about it. It's great we've had the conversation. And I think the farmers that were in the room for those workshops, we almost opened a can of worms to start that conversation of really thinking about the good, the bad, and everything in between. So the report's out, which is fantastic, and it's been a really insightful read. But what next, Bill?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's sort of three next bits. One of them is, out of these discussions, it became clear that industry groups have a role to play in regulation, and it's not clear. Well, it's nothing that Thriving Southland can do or that farmers can do themselves, but the industry group does have this role to play as kind of a go-between. So first of all, informing farmers and finding proactive ways to get that information out there, but then also finding ways to work with regulators and make sure that that kind of farming voice is being heard early in the process, like Richard was just saying. And that's clearly one of their roles, and that's one of the roles that they talk about. But I guess what we're hearing in the workshops is it'd be good to see more of that going on. The second thing was farmers were definitely putting it on regulators, getting out there and finding out what's going on and listening to people. Now, again, that's kind of nothing that we can have an impact on, but through the political process, making sure that the ministries understand that they need to be reaching out sooner is important. So then that takes me to what can we really do? Where is our, where can we have an impact? And Thriving Southland, through this whole process, through these projects, has been trying to understand its role. And I don't want to tell you what to do. I mean, and I think Richard will jump in here and talk about that. But what I took away from it is there's a kind of an information broker role to be played here. And it isn't that Thriving Southland's going to tell anybody what to do, but because you're working with farmers all the time, you're at the ground level and you're working with people who are trying to work through problems in a collective way. Thriving Southland is in a great position to kind of broker those conversations, to set up the meetings, to set up the evening talks, to bring in experts, to kind of share that information so that farmers know what's going on. And also the industry groups and the regulators are hearing directly from farmers. So I think, Thriving Southland, in addition to all the other good work you're doing, can help this process.
Yeah, cool. It sounds like a big role there, Bill. Richard, do you care to comment on Bill's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the key thing about Thriving Southland is it actually sits in the catchment groups, supporting the catchment groups and listening to the farmers and actually trying to find the way forward for them when they come to us and say, can you help with this challenge and that challenge? So I think maybe from a Thriving perspective, it's more about the voice being connected in with the levy groups and the voice being like the federated farmers having the discussions with the catchment groups and understanding the actual on the ground sort of voice at a broader scale. Because as I say, we were surprised with the range of views in the room, but actually the outcome is if there has to be regulation, it needs to be fit for purpose and there needs to be a really strong why about it. And I suppose just finishing a lot of the feedback was that farmers can see, the markets and the why and the need, and that, that's clearly explained why you have to head down that track. So it's those kind of discussions, but at the on the ground level, I think sometimes they're missed out of it, and everybody can be a bit guilty of that. Everybody has the discussion at a higher level and moves on, and nobody's actually had the discussion on the ground. So that's probably my view is where Thriving sits, is in that bringing that discussion forward. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. And Bill, did you have any sort of final comments that you wanted to make about this report that's being done?
Yeah, there's one bit that I've missed out actually, and I'll stick it in here. But Richard made the point about clarity of regulation, and that really came through. The reason it's important is that farmers see themselves as problem solvers, and when the regulation is clear, then they've got a clear problem to solve. So tell me what you're trying to achieve. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me what the number is I need to achieve, and I'll figure out how to do that on my land, in my farming system, for the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And that's one of the great benefits of good regulation, is it kind of unleashes the problem-solving abilities of farmers.
That's such a cool way to finish. I like that. And I was actually just looking at, some of the key points that you've identified in the report by farmers. And it is, largely based around this whole problem solving and understanding the outcome that's wanting to be achieved. So with that, I think we have given our listeners a lovely snippet into this report and what it was all about. So thank you for your time, Bill, and thank you, Richard. For anyone who would like to read the full report, Challenges and Opportunities in the Farming Regulation Space, you can find it on the Thriving Southland website under Resources. We hope you enjoyed the show, and, feel free to share it around. We'd love to see you connect with us on social media and send us a message if you've got any questions.